Hi, this is Krista at the Secret Yarnery. Today we are making the Speedy Granny Ruth baby blanket. What makes this Speedy Granny Ruth baby blanket so quick and so great is it's a 1-row repeat, so every row is the same. It automatically has a very straight edge as part of the pattern. We skip every 4th stitch going along, so you end up doing 25% less stitches for your blanket, which helps it go really, really quick. It's very similar to the Granny Ruth bedspread pattern. I'll link that up in the cards. That pattern has tassels on each side. This tutorial has a nice flat straight edge, no tassels, so it's perfect for babies. There is a written pattern for this tutorial over on my website, secretyarnery.com. Another great thing about this pattern is it starts and ends with a cute little scallop, so you don't need to put a border on it, but I will be doing a tutorial for a border in an upcoming video. And also at the end of the video, I'll be showing you how to fix a hole if you forget to do one of your stitches. I will show you how to go back and fix that without removing all your stitches or frogging back to that little mistake. So I'll be showing you that at the end of this tutorial. This Speedy Granny Ruth baby blanket can be made with any yarn. For this tutorial, I used 3 cakes of Cakes Baby Fine from Ice Yarns. This is very similar to a DK weight yarn. They call it a size 2, but it's pretty much a 3 weight yarn in my opinion. And it is really great to work with. It is 100 grams and 360 meters and 100% premium acrylic. So 3 of these cakes work up to be 1 baby blanket. You can use any yarn at all for this blanket. This is the same blanket but made with a worsted weight yarn and a larger hook. So just use whatever hook goes along with your yarn. To make the Speedy Granny Ruth baby blanket without a fringe or no tassels, you will need 3 cakes of Cakes Baby Fine or whatever yarn you are working with. If you're using a thin yarn like this, you will need 300 grams. Or if you're using a worsted weight yarn, you will need 6 100-gram skeins. You will also need some stitch markers, a pair of scissors, a crochet hook. I'll be using a 5mm crochet hook with this yarn. And to start our chain, I'm going to be using a 6mm hook just to start out, just for the chain. You will also need a darning needle to sew in your tails later. I'll put a link to all of this in the description box below, as well as the link to the written pattern if you want to follow along on paper. And let's get started. To make the Granny Ruth baby blanket, start by making a slip knot, leaving a long enough tail to sew in with a needle later. Shrink it down and put it onto your hook. For the chain, I'll be using the 6mm hook. For a baby blanket size, we're going to be chaining 108. If you are using a worsted weight yarn and a size 7 hook, you will chain 84. Get your stitch markers ready and chain 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And 10, and then into that chain, not what's on your hook, but what is underneath, just pop in a stitch marker into that stitch. And chain 10 more. Pop another stitch marker, so pause the video and continue making your chain until you have 108 chains. When you have your 108 chains, switch to your smaller hook. I'll be using my 5mm for this pattern. If you are using worsted weight yarn, switch back to your 7mm hook. Pinch that last chain that we made just so you kind of keep track of where it is, and chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Wrap your yarn and into that chain where you're pinching, or the 4th chain from your hook. We're going to make 1 double crochet. So to count your stitches, you don't count what's on your hook. So if you look at the bottom side of your chain, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is right here. So we're just going to go right on top of that bottom loop, and that will get 2 strands of that chain on the top of our hook. So wrap your yarn and into the 4th chain from the hook, 1 double crochet. Our chain counts as a double crochet for this pattern, so that counts as 2 double crochets. And now into the next chain, so not this loop here, we've already worked into this. We're going to go into the next chain and make 1 double crochet. So wrap your yarn and into the next chain, 1 double crochet. And that counts as 3 double crochets. So chain 1, we're going to skip a stitch. I'm going to skip a chain. So we've worked into this chain here. We're going to skip the first chain and we're going to work into the second. We're going to put our hook in right here. So wrap your yarn and into the second chain, 1 double crochet. And into each of the next 2 chains, we're going to put 1 double crochet into each. We've worked into this chain. We're going to go into the first and into the second, and we're going to make 1 double crochet into each. So wrap your yarn into the next chain, 1 double crochet. Wrap your yarn and into the next chain, 1 double crochet. So there is our set of 3. Chain 1, we're going to skip a chain and make another set of 3. So here's the chain we've already worked into. This is the chain we're going to skip. Make sure your chain's not twisted. We want to be looking at those nice little V's. So this is the chain we've worked into. This is the chain we're going to skip. I'm going to skip the first chain, and we're going to start our set of 3 into the second chain. I'm going to make double crochet, and double crochet, 1 into each chain. So wrap your yarn, skip a chain into the second chain, 1 double crochet, and 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 chains. 1 and 2. Chain 1. We can take our stitch markers out now actually. So we're going to skip a chain. We've worked into this chain here. We're going to skip this one and we're going to make 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 chains for our set of 3. So we're going to skip a chain and into the second, third, and fourth chain, 1 double crochet into each. So wrap your yarn, skip a chain, and into the second, 1 double crochet, and 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 chains. 1 and 2. After your set of 3 double crochets, we're always going to chain 1, skip a chain, and 3 double crochets, 1 into each stitch, starting in the second chain. So wrap your yarn, skip a chain, and 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. There's 2 and 3. We finished our set of 3, so chain 1. Now you can pause the video and keep going, making these sets of 3 with a chain 1, skip 1 in between. So pause the video and keep working into your chain, making sets of 3 double crochets with a chain 1, skip 1, all the way down, and I'll meet you when you get close to the end of your chain. At the end of your chain, you'll have 2 chains left. If you have more chains at the end of your row, you could undo that knot and pick it back until you have 2. And if you only have 1, just ignore it. Just pretend you have 2. We finished our last set of 3. So chain 1, wrap your yarn, skip 1, and we're going to make 1 double crochet into that very last chain. Just right there. So wrap your yarn and into that last chain, 1 double crochet. So that finishes our row. To start your next row, chain 2, 1 and 2, and turn your work. Into the chain below this space, we're going to do a spiked double crochet or a spike stitch. So wrap your yarn and we're going to go into that chain. It doesn't really matter where. I just go underneath 1 loop like that and then around everything. So wrap your yarn, poke that 1 loop on your hook, go down under, pinch, and crochet 1 double crochet around everything. So it'll look like that, a little bit messy to start. Wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into the next stitch. So the next stitch is the first double crochet of the next set of 3. So it is right here, right there. So wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into the next stitch. Our chain counts as our first double crochet, so that counts as our set of 3. So chain 1, skip 1, and 1 double crochet into the second stitch. Into the chain below the space, we're going to do our drop down double crochet or our spiked double crochet. So poke one of those loops onto your hook, go down underneath everything and do your spiked double crochet. And into the next stitch, 1 double crochet. That's our set of 3, so chain 1, skip 1, and we're going to be building our sets of 3 around each of these spaces. So chain 1, skip 1, wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into the second stitch. Wrap your yarn and 1 spiked double crochet into the chain below the space. And 1 double crochet into the next stitch. There's our set of 3. Chain 1, skip 1, and 1 double crochet into the second stitch. It's the stitch right before the space. Wrap your yarn and 1 spiked double crochet into the chain below the space. Wrap your yarn and go around everything to make your double crochet. And 1 double crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip 1, 1 double crochet into the second stitch or the stitch right before the space. Wrap your yarn, 1 spiked double crochet into the chain below the space. So poke one of those loops on your hook and 1 double crochet around everything. Wrap your yarn, 1 double crochet into the next stitch. Make sure you've done your set of 3. Chain 1, skip 1, and we're going to keep doing that all the way along our row. So into the stitch before the space, 1 double crochet. Into the stitch below the space or into the chain, 1 spiked double crochet. And into the next stitch after the space, 1 double crochet. So that's our set of 3 for this row. Chain 1, skip 1. So your work will look like this, sets of 3 double crochet with a chain 1 space in between. So you're going to keep going along your row, building that set around each of the chain 1 spaces of your work, making a double crochet into the stitch before the space, a spiked double crochet below the space, and a double crochet into the stitch right after the space. Chain 1, skip 1, and repeat that all along your row around each space. Double crochet, spiked double crochet, chain 1, skip 1. Repeat all the way along, and I'll meet you at the end of this row. At the end of the row, you'll have this little blip left. So I've done my last set of 3. I'm still going to chain 1 and skip 1. The stitch we're going to skip is this double crochet. If you roll your chain towards you a little bit, you can see your stitch is a little nicer. So this here is our double crochet. We want to go in to the first chain right after it. So the top of the chain 3. So wrap your yarn and go into that stitch. You just want 2 strands on the top of your hook and make your last double crochet. Don't worry if it looks like a little blip coming out still. That's going to sort itself out as we work on our blanket. And now we're going to start the repeat. So this is what you're going to do for every single row. You're going to make your double crochet into the top of the chain and then chain 2. 1, 2. Turn your work. Now into the stitch below this very first space, we're going to be making our spike stitch. So wrap your yarn, and we're gonna go right in to this stitch. And we're gonna go under everything. So we're gonna go right down here and make our double crochet. So push your hook into that stitch. You want both strands of that V on your hook. There's our 2 strands. Grab your yarn and bring it back and finish your double crochet. So it'll look like that. Into the next stitch, double crochet, chain 1, skip 1. We're going to be skipping every long stitch. All of these spike stitches is the stitch we're going to skip. So wrap your yarn and go in to the first stitch before the space. Make your double crochet. Make your spike stitch into the stitch below the space. And make your last double crochet into the next stitch. Chain 1, skip 1, skip that spike stitch, wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into the stitch before the space. Wrap your yarn, 1 spike double crochet into the stitch below the space. And 1 double crochet into the stitch after the space. Chain 1, skip 1. So our row looks like this. Sets of 3 stitches, double crochet, spike double crochet, and double crochet all around each of these spaces in the row down below. So we're going to keep doing that all the way along. So chain 1 to skip 1. If you want to know if you did your chain, look underneath your hook and you will see 1 strand of yarn on your working yarn. That means you have done your chain. If you have not done your chain, underneath your hook you will see 2 strands of yarn on your working yarn. So that means you have not done your chain. So chain 1, skip 1, and keep repeating this pattern all the way along this row, making 1 double crochet into the stitch before the space, 1 spiked double crochet into the stitch below the space, and 1 double crochet into the stitch after the space. Chain 1, skip 1, and repeat all the way down this row until you reach the end. So pause the video and I'll meet you when you get down to the end. At the end of your row, we're going to skip that double crochet. So chain 1, and we're going to go into the top of our chain. So you can roll the chain towards yourself to find that stitch, or you can wrap your yarn and just work straight into it. So I know that this is my double crochet, this proper looking stitch right here. That is my double crochet. So I want to go in, I'm going to go in from the back and just grab that loop and then in through that space. And that is going to give me 2 strands of the top of that chain on my hook for a nice tight join. So wrap your yarn, get that loop of yarn onto your hook, put your hook into that space, that flips it, so you have 2 strands of the top of the chain on your hook, and make your last double crochet of the row. Chain 2, 1, 2, and turn your work. So that is the repeat. We're going to keep doing that all the way along our blanket until we run out of yarn or our blanket is the size we want it to be. So to start, you wrap your yarn and you do your spiked double crochet into that very first stitch underneath the space. And you finish off that set of 3 by making a double crochet into the next stitch. So now it looks the same as the last row. Chain 1, skip 1, and you build your set of 3 around that space. So double crochet into the stitch before the space, spiked double crochet into the stitch below the space, and double crochet into the stitch after the space. Chain 1, skip 1, and repeat all the way along your row. So keep going, and I'll meet you at the end of this row just to make sure you have that repeat down. At the end of the row, we have another kind of circle area. That is going to be our last double crochet just into the top of that chain 2. So we're still going to chain 1 and skip that double crochet, and now work into the top of that chain 2. So wrap your yarn and work into the top of that chain 2 and make your last double crochet of the row. If you're looking at your work and you feel like it's still, you haven't gotten to the end or you've dropped a stitch, don't worry about it. As long as you have done your last double crochet into the top of the chain 2, it will straighten out when we turn our work. So to start the next row, chain 2, 1 and 2, turn your work, wrap your yarn and make 1 spike stitch double crochet into that stitch underneath the space. Get your yarn coming from the top and make your spike stitch double crochet, 1 double crochet into the next stitch, chain 1, skip 1, and now we'll keep going along, but you can see that evened out your side quite a bit. And it'll look a lot more straight as we go. Each row will have a little bit of a bump, similar to the bottom of our blanket, a little scallop. So pause the video and keep repeating this row until your blanket is the height you'd like it to be. When you have almost finished your third cake, you have enough yarn to go back for 1 more row. We're gonna do the last row a little bit different. I finished my last row the same as always with my double crochet and the chain 2. So go ahead and turn your work. Wrap your yarn and into the same spot we were doing our spike stitches, we're gonna do a spiked half double crochet. So wrap your yarn and go into the stitch under the space. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops. Now into each of the next 3 stitches, we're going to do 3 double crochets. So 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Into the stitch below the space, we're going to wrap our yarn and do 1 spiked half double crochet. So you're going to wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops at the same time. And now 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3. And a spiked half double crochet into the stitch below the space. So wrap your yarn, insert your hook, bring your yarn back, wrap your yarn, and take off all 3. 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3. And a spiked half double crochet into the stitch below the space. So as we're working along, doing our spiked half double crochet and our 3 double crochets, 1 into each stitch, we end up making this little kind of shell pattern which finishes off our blanket nicely and also resembles what we were doing when we started. So both ends of your blanket will match and also along the side. So keep working your way along this row, making 1 spiked half double crochet into the stitch below the space and 1 double crochet into each stitch, going all the way along, and I'll meet you at the end of this row. At the end of your row, you're going to end with 3 double crochets. This is my last spiked half double. So we're going to go into each of the last 2 stitches, 1 double crochet and a 2nd double crochet. And that gets us right up to the chain. And now we're going to do our double crochet into the chain, the same as we were for every round. Just going in, getting 2 strands of that chain on your top and 1 underneath, and make your last double crochet. Chain 1, cut your yarn, leaving a long enough tail to sew in with a needle later. Pull your hook up and your yarn through and snug that down to secure. Now just weave in your tails and you're finished. To fix a stitch that you maybe forgot to do your drop down spiked double crochet, save yourself a little piece of yarn that is the same color as where you need it to be, and just thread that on your needle to start. And we're going to be working our stitch right in this area for this row here, because we're doing our drop down. So we're going to start in this row. So I just want to anchor my yarn. So I'm just going to come in a little bit before, a couple stitches before. We're going to weave in our tail after. This is just to give us a little anchor. Just get your yarn into the right spot. So there's our tail. And we're going to use the same hook as we were for our blanket. So hold your crochet hook and your yarn on both sides. And wrap your yarn twice around your crochet hook and go in where you need that stitch to be. So I'm going right down into the top of that double crochet and up through where I should have started it. So at the top, I have all that on my hook. And now I'm going to grab this yarn and bring it through and do my double crochet. So there's take off 2 and take off 2. Just like that. Now I'm going to pull my yarn through the top of that stitch. Grab my needle. So now we're going to anchor that double crochet into the same row, just into the next stitch over, where our yarn would have naturally been going if we hadn't made a mistake. So now that is how our stitch looks like. You can't see the hole anymore. There's no extra tension, no bulk. And now we just sew in our tails and pretend we didn't do it. So you can't tell where it is, and it looks like you didn't forget your stitch. So that is a little tip or trick. It is fiddly. Ideally, you just make every stitch for every row and check your row before you move on. But if you do make the same mistake I did, that is a nice quick fix of how to fix it. So when you've sewn in your tails, just snip them off and you're done.